All right, guys, with the dust settling after UFC 254, there are a lot of things to talk about. We saw one of the greatest to do it possibly for the last time. So many other great fights on the card, and there's one person we got on that is kind enough to stay up late yet again and join us at 2:30 in the morning from Fight Island. You know, from her amazing work, they should really change it to Sanko Island at this point. Laura Sanko, welcome to Submission Ready. It's great to have you.
Always good to be here, guys. You got me again. I'm such a sucker for talking fights.
But you don't have to whisper. You don't have to whisper because the family's sleeping in another room. You can yell as loud as you want.
There's actually a club just on the other side of the bay where this hotel is, and they're thumping till about this time every night. So yeah, it's pretty standard that there's a lot of noise going on at the W here. So yeah, I can be loud as I want.
Awesome. Your hotel suite looks like something from an action movie where somebody would get smashed through the glass and the fight would ensue into the club floor. But this is a nice little tradition we've got going on with you, Laura. So we appreciate it. Obviously, a lot to unpack and a lot to digest from UFC 254. Before we talk about, one of the greatest retirements in MMA history, just obviously want to get your thoughts on the fight itself. Justin Gaethje seen as a guy who really could have challenged Khabib's throne and, maybe take that belt from him. And we saw yet again another dominant performance from Khabib. A really fun fight while it lasted. What did you make of the actual action in the fight this time around?
I was blown away, and it's unusual that you can be blown away by someone who has already been so dominant, right? It almost becomes the expectation. It becomes the bar. So for him to go out there and make my jaw, and I think a lot of other people's jaws drop again tonight, is it's incredible. It's remarkable. And I have to eat my own words, because I'm not going to lie. I saw this fight going very differently. And as the week was unfolding, I was really starting to have some thoughts about Justin Gaethje being able to get this done. I was formulating in my mind that, Khabib's never faced a D1 wrestler. You saw what Ally Quinto was able to do in very short notice in terms of stopping the takedown. Justin Gaethje's precision and high volume striking, the pressure that he brings, and every bit of that was completely turned on its head in this fight. And I think, the biggest thing that struck me about this fight was it seemed like, and I don't know if he did it consciously, maybe he did, but it seemed like he was out there to yet again prove another point, because not only did he spend almost the entirety of the first round striking, he was pressure striking. And when he did take it to the ground, it was not his usual wrist wrap, look to dominate with ground and pound and chip away and just sort of break the will of the other person. He was immediately looking for submissions, and not just chokes. He was looking for arm bars and ultimately the triangle. And it felt to me like it was his way of capping off this incredible career and saying, no, I really am this well-rounded fighter, and you guys just never quite fully appreciated it.
That's a fantastic point. So from your perspective, you don't think it had anything to do with the weight cut? I know that we had that weight situation the other day that people were talking all about, and people saying if this goes into the later rounds, this might be Gaethje's fight. And of course, it never entered the late rounds. You think it was more so Khabib just trying to make a point here?
He called a submission victory, and I'd have to go through my notes, but I could swear he called a second round submission victory. I think he came out there with a very specific intent and with a motivation that I don't think you or I will ever understand, and that was to put a stamp not only on his legacy, on this fight, on his career, but on his father's career as his coach. It sounds kind of cheesy to say he wasn't just out there fighting for himself, but that's a very literal thing tonight. He was not only putting a stamp on his legacy, he was putting a stamp on his father's legacy. When you're motivated by things like that, and you are as skilled as Khabib is, you can do about anything you want to do out there. I mean, I do think that he had a rough weight cut, and I do think that scale looked a little not settled, but whatever. We're past that at this point. It doesn't matter.
He learned the moves of Daniel Cormier.
Yeah. He wasn't touching the towel, but he had a very friendly...
Double wrist grab at the start. Hopefully gravity doesn't take its course too quickly.
Yes. But no, I think I will say, though, I do think that there was urgency created by the leg kicks that Justin Gaethje was landing, for sure. I mean, I don't think maybe 3 more really well-connected leg kicks like that, and we would have potentially seen the tide start to change. So I do think that there was urgency created by what Justin was bringing to the table as well.
Absolutely. And also, Dana White saying that apparently Khabib had a broken foot. I don't know if you guys heard of the post-fight press conference 3 weeks ago, and that would explain everything. Tough weight cut. How are you losing weight if you've got a broken foot, right? You can't do your running, you can't do your sprinting. And also the urgency, knowing that you've got that foot and it's a problem to you, you want to try and get that fight finished quickly. And there was a sense of urgency, and there was a sense of, all right, I'm going in here to get this job done by Khabib, which he did successfully. But I want to talk about Justin Gaethje for a second here, Laura, because this is a man that came out here and he was kind of seemingly unraveled a little bit at the start of the fight. There was no real game plan. And he even saw Trevor Whitman kind of telling him, look, calm down, throw those leg kicks, bring everything together. It kind of seems like he had a little bit of success. And when he did, you really saw those flashes of what could have happened in the fight if he was kind of a little bit more settled going in from the very beginning. Do you think Justin Gaethje, was the moment too much for him? Was it having your parents there? Was it the fact there's so much riding on this? It seemed like all week long, even in the face-offs, you know, him shaking his arm a little bit, he kind of seemed a little bit nervous, a little bit I don't want to say he was unsure of himself, because he was definitely sure of himself, but it kind of seemed like the moment kind of got to him a little bit.
I can see that. I can see that. There were interactions maybe that I saw at the hotel where I wouldn't disagree with that. That's not the first thing I go to, though. I think I've never seen Khabib fight with that level of pressure before, and I don't know and I don't know if Justin's ever faced anybody that has just completely disrespected his power like that. And it's crazy. I mean, you think about fighting someone like Tony, and we always kind of lovingly joke that Tony's got a screw loose, you know, in the most respectful way possible. Khabib had a screw loose tonight. I mean, to wade into the fire and to deliver the level of pressure that he was delivering to Justin Gaethje, who lands almost 8 significant strikes per minute, the highest rate in the history of the company. And Khabib went out there and flipped the script and became the busier fighter and was just right in his face. I mean, Justin couldn't, you know, normally when you've got a guy pressuring, the other guy panic shoots. But Justin Gaethje's not going to panic shoot on Khabib. That's just dumb, right? I mean, he's a good wrestler, but he made it clear, why would I take, you know, the difficult path to victory? So when you've got a pressure fighter who doesn't have the threat of a panic takedown, I mean, Katie barred the door. It was like, you could just see this feeling of Justin just needed, just a few minutes to breathe. He just couldn't settle into the fight. He couldn't find his range. You know, when we saw him fight Tony, it was that mastery of range, the angles, the footwork that he was able to implement. And he was able to be patient because Tony allowed him to be patient in that fight. And then we saw a different version, a higher level version of Justin Gaethje. And Khabib completely took that out of the equation. There's no way that you can be patient when you are dealing with the type of pressure that Khabib brought in this fight.
And I love Khabib. You're absolutely right, Laura. And I love Khabib's ability to stay calm and composed even amidst the chaos, and to sort of make Justin Gaethje be on the back foot and not be able to have as much power on those punches. You know, throwing things like flying knees and just being creative and being able to experiment in the fight was just a phenomenal thing to see. But then comes the retirement. Then comes the moment that I feel like no one was really that shocked by, but no one really wanted to see it either. We wanted Khabib to get to 30-0. That was his father's dream and his father's plan. You know, what did you make of this retirement? Did it surprise you in any way? And I guess, do you think it sticks?
I guess it did and didn't surprise me at the same time. I mean, I thought he would get to 30-0 because that was kind of the narrative that was, as you say, his father's plan. And it seemed like that was a very special goal to him. But when you heard him say, you know, the conversations that took place between him and his mom, you can see why he made that change tonight. And listening to Javier Mendez in the lead up to this fight talk about the differences in the camp, and I think he even used the word lonely. You know, it was a lonely fight week for Khabib. You're stuck in your room. Like, this is a beautiful hotel, obviously. But it's kind of a lonely place. I'm not going to lie. Like, there's not the hubbub of some fight weeks in Las Vegas just because of the COVID situation. Everybody kind of keeps to their rooms and we've all got our masks on. It's just a very like isolated feeling. And you pile that on top of not having your father, your coach, your pillar, the cornerstone of the reason you're even on this journey to begin with, not be here. I can understand. I can completely understand why he thought, you know what, I'm just never going to do this again. Not without my dad. So in terms of, do I think it sticks? I do. I think Khabib has a different level of principles than a lot of people do. I think a lot of fighters, it's not that everybody's out there trying to pull stunts and, retire and then unretire. I just think people, they waver in their feelings, and MMA is a drug that's very hard to quit. It's the hardest. I've never done drugs before, actually. So acting like I know, but from what I can tell, it is the hardest drug to quit because there's never a good time, right? There's never a good time to retire. And if you retire on top, you feel like you left something on the table. And if you wait too long, it's a mess and no one wants to see it. So I don't think we'll see him back. I think he is a man of his principles and a man of his word. And I think that's the last we're going to see. I left the arena because he didn't do press. I left the arena a little bit earlier than I normally would. And I was waiting outside for a shuttle to come back to the hotel. And I was about to get on and they said, sorry, we don't mean to be rude, but we need you to stay back because Khabib wants to leave and not do any media. So like, actually, it was this weird moment, like catching him.
And you said, no, I'm Laura Sanko and I need to do an interview with Submission Radio. Damn it. Get him to walk home.
Laura would not have a job. But it was this weird moment of watching him walk out of the arena for the last time and get on this bus. And it was just like, I kind of wanted to cry. It was so, it was bittersweet. I'm happy for him and what he was able to achieve. But as the fan in me is like, I want more.
Yeah. And it's interesting because obviously the next big fight was going to be him and GSP. But in a lot of ways, him retiring kind of keeps two legacies intact. You've got GSP who now won't be coming back at 40, potentially cutting down to 155. And potentially, putting a different ending to his legacy that's been super impressive. And also Khabib not taking on possibly one of the toughest fights that he could have in his career as well in GSP. I'm curious, though, 29-0, champion, incredible performances, especially tonight against Justin Gaethje, a guy who went through Tony Ferguson like that. Where do you rank Khabib's legacy, what he's done in the sport, and on the pound-for-pound list? And I hate talking about this because I don't really think pound for pound is even a thing. But, I mean, hypothetically, where would he kind of rank for you in terms of some of the other incredible legacies the fighters have left in that octagon?
He's certainly up there. I mean, I think in terms of current, I mean, it's hard to say current because he just retired, but in terms of recent individuals that we would throw in that mix, I do think he's pound for pound the greatest. The man's never been beaten, and I think there was some debate, but he's either lost one or two rounds. I mean, that cannot be said of anyone else, even John. And I don't personally like bringing John's issues outside of the octagon into that equation, but it's hard not to when you look at someone who has lived the type of life that Khabib lives as well. It's hard not to kind of make that like a little asterisk in your head, When it comes to greatest of all time, though, he's got stiff competition. He's got really stiff competition. He's got people that defended their belts 10, 11, 12 times. He's got people that cleared out. Now, you could argue that he cleared out a division, but you could also argue that there were maybe, I hate saying this on a night that he retired, I feel like I'm taking away, but you could argue that there were maybe a couple chips left on the table, right? Mm-hmm. The Tony fight that we'll never get to see and others as well. So, and beating Conor was incredible. And Conor, I'm of the belief that Conor is a very good fighter, but that doesn't have the same level, the Al fight, things like that. I don't think fully compare to someone's entire legacy. maybe the way John does. I don't know. It's hard to answer.
I like your points, Laura, because it keeps things open and open-minded, and that's really what it is. I don't think there really is one GOAT or one number one pound for pound. I think it's kind of like different depending on whose lens you see it from. But looking at Khabib, I feel like some of the fairy tale retirements in MMA, like say for Fedor or Anderson Silva, that's what people hope they would look like. And today, Khabib did that. Undefeated, 29-0, never knocked down, never cut in his career. Just a phenomenal retirement. I think undisputed best lightweight of all time and the best probably retirement in MMA. I think we can agree on that. As far as what's next for the division, I mean, people are talking about maybe, you know, Dustin and Conor fighting for some kind of vacant belt. People are talking about where it puts Tony Ferguson, a guy like Michael Chandler, who already the UFC holds in higher regards. And then there's Justin Gaethje, who, you know, beat Tony. What do you think is next for the division as far as, you know, who will be fighting for that belt and, you know, who's going to be fighting for that belt?
Yeah. I don't quite know the rules here. Obviously, Justin lost, but the title is vacant, and he was the most recent interim champion who is now still active. So I feel like that has to put him at the top of a very short list. I would, I personally don't know if Tony...
Is that Conor McGregor messaging you right now going, mention me?
Can you
Laura.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. I might flip over in my chair now. Sorry about that. No, I think I don't know. I feel bad saying this. I don't know if Tony's ever going to be the same again. And I don't even know what I'm basing that off of, to be honest with you. And I'm going to tune in to watch him fight, but just part of my mind is worried that fight with Justin really changed the trajectory of his career. I love that Michael Chandler is in the division now. Love that. I think it adds a very interesting mix, but we've seen, I think an interesting debate for a lot of people is, where is the parity, you know, between Bellator and the UFC? And we have some examples to go off of. And if past is prologue, for the most part, with some exceptions, for the most part, we have seen Bellator champions be top 10 material for sure, but not necessarily quite as dominant in the UFC as they have been in Bellator. I am anxious to see if Michael can buck that trend and come in here and really shake this division up, because I think he'd make some interesting fights. I would like to see him fight Tony, actually. I think that'd be a great fight. And then I can see Justin maybe facing the winner of Poirier versus Conor. See, I just fixed everything.
Wow, okay. So Justin faces the winner of Poirier Conor, and you got Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson for their shot at being the other person that fights for the title. And I'd love to know, in that tournament scenario, who do you think actually ends up fighting for the title? Just to follow that one up. So you got a tournament on one side. I guess you got your Conor, you got your Gaethje, and you got your Poirier. On the other side, you got your Chandler and you got your Tony Ferguson. If you had to sort of imagine who ends up in the last bracket, Mortal Kombat stuff.
Early picks, Laura, so no pressure.
You guys, you're really... Like, if you start seeing smoke come out of my ears, it's because my brain's working too hard right now.
And by the way, we all realized Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor will be fighting for the title, right? There's no way Dana White's not going to make that for the title. I feel like we're wasting time here, but let's just for fun's sake. He seems very down today, Laura, so I think that's the only thing that will pick up his mood.
Yeah,
make some money from that
fighting
fight.
at 170 for 155 pounds. Golly, I think... Oh, there's so many X factors with Conor. Okay, I think a motivated, focused Conor can beat Dustin. I think that man, as long as Tony didn't get too changed by the Gaethje fight, I think Tony can get past Michael. And I think that we see Gaethje Conor.
Oh, wouldn't that be kind of like the dream scenario?
Out yet again.
Yeah. This is is why I'm not a match.
I think it kind of wins it, right? There's no way, if it's not already for the title, there's no way it's not going to be for the title, right? Unless something crazy happens. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I feel like Laura deserves a breather after that one. We're working her too hard. And I'll give you that one, Laura, when I remind everyone, before we talk about Robert Whittaker versus Jared Cannonier, to check out our new sponsor, Manscaped. They are offering the Lawnmower 3.0 and a fantastic package to keep your beans silky smooth. We can all attest, very happy beans at the moment. They've got the Lawnmower 3.0, and you can get 20% off right now with the code SUBMISSION, supporting your favorite MMA show and supporting the MMA community. Manscaped, I mean, just doing fantastic things, right, Dennis?
Yeah, that's right, man. You mentioned it. Code SUBMISSION. Go on there. It's manscaped.com. Not only do you get 20% off, but it's free shipping. Right now, over here, we're in lockdown. So don't make that lockdown make you smelly downstairs. You know, you got to protect the pocket rocket and beans. Make sure to go out there, get your Manscaped. We got the product ourselves. And, man, I only had one testicle left after cutting one off with some scissors the other week, Cass. So it's nice that it's got an LED light and you're actually able to see what you're doing down there. Don't ruin your future by being cheap and silly. That's 20% off. It's great value. And Manscaped is definitely one of the best out there. Waterproof. And also, I believe there's, Cass, 90 minutes on a charge as well. So no more cheap trimmers dying in the middle of a shower and you walking out with a weird situation downstairs. Go to manscaped.com, submission, get 20% off and free shipping. Do it now. Now, Laura, speaking of impressive performances.
I have so many questions after that ad. So many questions.
We're here to answer all of them, Laura. Go for it.
Are silky smooth beans the goal? Who takes the 90-minute shower?
You could do patterns. You could do the Tito Ortiz. You could do the wild thing from Major League. You can go anyway. Speed lines.
You could do Kimbo
strikes.
Slice and just do half. Yeah.
The arrow. Who's the
pitch,
fighter that shaves the arrow? I can't remember.
Brian Ebersol.
Yes.
Brian Ebersol.
The arrow makes things a lot easier. Draws the attention to the right areas.
You can do a Roy Jones Jr. just shaved one half. Possibilities are endless. Just don't cut off a testicle doing it.
Shave the testicle off.
Yeah, exactly. Don't shave off a testicle because they don't go back, unfortunately. The other stuff does. That doesn't. So Manscaped's great for it.
Moving on.
I gotta say, we gotta talk about this Robert Whittaker, Jared Cannonier fight as well because, man, I find this really interesting, Laura, and I want to get your thoughts on it as well. It was a 3-round fight, which I really think changed a lot of things. I would have really loved to see what would have happened if this was 5 rounds. Obviously, Robert Whittaker did a phenomenal job, landed a lot of great jabs, but Jared Cannonier still had a bit of success with his leg kicks, still landed some good shots himself. What were your thoughts on Robert Whittaker in there against Jared Cannonier and the way the fight played out? There was a little moment at the end there almost where Jared Cannonier was able to capitalize a little bit, but ultimately Rob was able to get the job done.
You know, I actually thought it was one of Rob's better performances of his career, and maybe that I'm having some recency bias because I just watched it. But I just thought he looked he looked relaxed. He looked confident in everything that he was doing, and you saw that during fight week as well. He's such a respectful guy and is never one to talk shit, but you could tell when he was answering questions about how he thought the fight was going to play out with Jared, he was having a hard time phrasing that I'm just literally better than this guy everywhere. I'm going to run through him. He wanted to say he was going to run through him. But now I didn't, before this fight, I thought it was going to be, razor thin matchup. Turned out not to be. I thought Robert looked as relaxed as ever. I felt like he came in with a really solid game plan to manage distance well, like he always does, be able to dart in and out and avoid a lot of Cannonier's power shots. And, when you make someone missing big shots is unbelievably exhausting, and a lot of times when you shadow box or when you're hitting pads, you don't practice the exhaustion of throwing, for instance, a full-on power overhand and missing it, and what that does to for your body to have to recoil after something like that. It's exhausting. And I'm not saying I thought Jared was gassing because he's in phenomenal shape, but I do think it can be mentally exhausting as well to start missing. His high kick, looked as good as it ever does, and that jab, as you say, was connecting as well. And he was just picking him apart for the most part until, these few moments where Jared shows what Jared can do, and that's, power that he has when he is able to connect. But Robert just did a phenomenal job of making those moments very few and far between. The kicks did seem to potentially be something that could play a role later in the fight. And again, I think Robert was very aware of that and very smart in how he handled it, switching stances and just managing that distance.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because as it stands in the middleweight division now, Whittaker versus Adesanya is the fight to make if we're looking at rankings and what makes sense in the near future. But every time Robert is asked about that fight, he's somewhat lukewarm. He wants the fight, but he's kind of like, yeah, I'll fight him at some point. And it's interesting because if not now, then what would even make sense for Robert next, right? He's ranked at the top. He beat the only other guy really in contention. It's got to be that fight. But then with Adesanya, it looks like he's taking the rest of the year off. And who knows, maybe he will actually come back and fight at light heavyweight. So based on this performance, Laura, or his last two, I should say, is there anything that leads you to believe that Whittaker would have better success against Adesanya if they had a rematch? And what gets you more excited? The idea of them doing a rematch or Adesanya moving up to light heavyweight, maybe taking on Jan, or maybe shocking us all and just meeting John Jones at heavyweight sometime next year?
Oh, my goodness. For whatever reason, the fight with Jan does not do it for me. The fight with John does it for me. I think I'm one of those people that I do get drawn into the soap opera, and I like a good, build up to a fight. I'm not going to lie. I also like a good, respectful build up to a fight like we have with Khabib and Justin, but there's something fun about two guys, getting back and forth with each other. The rematch, if we're talking about the middleweight division, the rematch with Robert is the one that makes sense. I mean, that is, as you said, that all paths have led to that moment. It sounds though like Rob really wants to take some time off as well. He's got a baby on the way, and he's been really open. He's a very honest guy when it comes to what's going on in his mind, and he looked great tonight because I think he trained in the way that he wanted to train, and he wasn't burned out. But I think that, again, too many back-to-back camps, and he's going to be in the same spot where he was before. So I think a second fight with Israel could potentially look different because anytime you go in there the second time, you know so much more about what you're walking into and what you have to deal with. And I think it could look different. I do think Israel is incredible. I mean, we've had those conversations, obviously. I would love to see that fight again. I really would.
It's interesting. Yeah, you mentioned it. He's got the newborn on the way, and he mentioned he wants to focus on Christmas. And in a lot of ways, this is good news for Robert Whittaker fans because we all know he's really had to deal with a lot of mental issues in terms of, dealing with pressures of the fight and how it's affected his personal life. And you can see now that he's sort of separated both things. He's got Christmas, he's got his newborn, and he says, I don't want to focus on fighting when I got Christmas coming up. I don't want to focus on fighting when I got my newborn coming up. And I think that was the big problem before. Reading a lot of the stuff that we've read and speaking to a lot of the times that we've spoken to him, it seems like the fighting really crossed into his personal life and really affected his moods and the way that he felt about it. So it's great to see that he's handling it from that perspective. If the John Jones fight and the Jan fight doesn't happen though, Laura, we've got this Till Hermansson fight coming up in December. One of those guys walks out of there, especially in Hermansson, unharmed, unhurt. Do you see a potential scenario where Israel potentially defends his title against one of those guys first before Robert Whittaker steps in there later on in 2021?
Potentially. I think if Robert is not in the picture, though, I think that is where we will see Israel start looking at light heavyweight. I'm not basing that on anything. That's just my gut reaction. I think that he is, he's excited. He's excited to start dancing around in these divisions a little bit the same way that John is kind of looking to bigger, broader pastures. And I don't mind it. I understand the need for continuity in divisions and to have clear paths that people can work toward becoming champion. But I love a good super fight. I'm a sucker for a super fight. So I'm with it. I'm about it.
And as we wrap up, Laura, just quickly, possibly one of the greatest characters in the UFC right now, Tai Tuivasa, was able to pick up a very impressive win over Stefan Struve, a veteran that's been in there forever and fought the best of the best. I know was this the first time you got an opportunity to spend a fight week around Tai? I just love to know, do you have any stories of being around him? Because the guy is an absolute legend and is just hilarious to be around during fight
And you're
week.
no stranger to a shoey either, Laura.
I'm not. And that shoey that you saw was not the first shoey I've done with Tai either. He's like, I swear to God, if there's a good time and any amount of alcohol, he just sort of appears. Like, I didn't even know.
Like Beetlejuice.
Yes. Yes. Say shoey 3 times and he just like, he's just there. Tai is one of my favorite people. I mean, you don't get more affable and he's just so easy to be around. He's so funny. And I actually have a really embarrassing story about Tai. It doesn't involve Tai, but it does involve an Australian rugby player, if you don't mind me telling you the story.
Of course.
Time. So I used to have this podcast, for lack of a better term, that I would do with Megan Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
And I am friends to a degree with Eric Groth Jr., not Eric Groth Sr., but Eric Groth Jr., through Instagram. And we've done podcasts together as well. And I don't know if you follow him at all on Instagram, but he has quite the sense of humor. And I hit him up and I was like, hey, we're going to be talking about Tai. Like, do you have any interesting stories from, because I know that I think they briefly, and I mean like really briefly, played footy around the same time. But he's like, no, I don't really know him that well. He said, although I do have just an interesting like nugget about him. He said, you would never believe this, but he is like mad about, he's like mad about toy trains.
No way.
He goes, he has an entire model train set in his garage and like went into great detail. He's like, oh yeah, he started working on it like back in the day and no one really knows about it because it's like obviously not like the coolest thing, but he's obsessed with model trains. And I was like, oh my gosh, Eric, thank you so much. This is such a great, interesting nugget. I've never heard this about Tai before. So I talk about it on the podcast. And then Eric goes, I was just joking. I thought you When I went on this podcast, I was like, you'll never believe what I know about Tai Tuivasa.
So you said this to Megan on your podcast.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Which, I mean, thank God, like only maybe 15,000 or so people saw it.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I was just completely, I thought I had a credible source. And I was so mad. I was like, you can't make, like, this is my job. I can't look like I just make shit up. But I saw Tai in Vegas several months after that, and I told him the story, and he was just about pissing himself. So that's my embarrassing Tai Tuivasa story. But I've done several shows with him. He's a great guy. And I'm super happy for his victory tonight. He looked awesome. He looked confident in his grappling. And I mean, Stefan Struve is such an awkward fight for anybody, but particularly someone who's a little bit shorter for the division like Tai. But he handled him, and he's got that power, and it's just so nice to see him back in his stride.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say there's probably a few people that got smashed in the bar that went up to Tai going, hey man, what are those little toy trains that you love to collect? And they never made it quite out of there. We know he likes those pub fights. But yeah, guys, make sure to follow Laura_Sanko on IG and Twitter, and no matter what you hear about toy trains, she's definitely one of the best out there. We appreciate you staying up late, giving us the stories on Sanko Island, 2:30 in the morning. It's a pleasure. Laura, thank you so much for joining us on Submission Radio.
Thank you guys for having me. Always a blast. I appreciate it.